for instance, why I started Anyscale. It's clear that I'm not starting Anyscale for money. It's like, I don't, like Databricks was doing quite well. And the first thing is actually we talked with some people, I think it was Hortonworks at that time, and we asked them if they want to take over the project, because it was clear at that point that if we want for Spark to succeed in some way as an open source, there has to be a company behind it. The communism in Romania was probably a bigger lie than almost in any other country. It was tough during communism. And, sometimes maybe this makes you to want more some things, to appreciate some things more, not take them for granted. You grow in a country in which, to get a car, it takes years, right? And it's a big event, right? And what car, like. The reason I love math and everything is because of my father.
Welcome to the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast, where we talk to computer scientists who immigrated from their home countries for study or for work or for other reasons. In these oral history interviews, you will find established and renowned computer scientists from across academia and industry narrating their experiences of immigrating from where they grew up to a completely different land, often the US. My name is Indy Gupta, and I'm your host. This is episode 32, an interview with Jon Stoica, professor of computer science at the University of California, Berkeley. Jon Stoica is also the founder of companies Databricks, Anyscale, and Conviva, and he has led the development of Apache Spark, Apache Mesos, Ray, and many other systems that are influential in the data processing industry landscape today. You may also enjoy the lead episode of this segment on Romania, that's episode 31, featuring two prominent computer scientists originally from Romania and who have been in the US since the 1990s. As usual, you can find all episodes and detailed episode guides on our website, csimmigrant.org. Again, that's csimmigrant.org. And you can find us and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and basically wherever you get your podcasts. This episode is structured into acts or chapters. You'll find chapter markers on your audio player, and you can use these to jump between the acts or chapters. I'm delighted to welcome Jon Stoica to the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast. Jon Stoica is a professor of computer science at the University of California, Berkeley, where he has been since 2000. Additionally, he is also executive chairman and president at Anyscale since 2019. Anyscale is centered around Ray, a system for running machine learning applications. He is also executive chairman at Databricks, formed in 2013. Databricks makes, among other things, products around Spark, which has quickly become a significant industry-wide standard for big data processing. He is also CTO of Conviva, which was formed in 2006 around the topic of large-scale video distribution. Jon works in areas of systems, networking, distributed systems, and operating systems. He's recognized as one of the top researchers in the area of systems. His work has produced Apache Spark, Apache Mesos, Tachyon, the Chord distributed hash table, dynamic packet state technologies, and many others that have influenced technology worldwide in industry. He's won many awards, including becoming an ACM Fellow, winning the SIGOPS Mark Weiser Award given by ACM to lifetime contributions in computer systems, the SIGOPS Hall of Fame Award in 2015. Previously, he also won the ACM Doctoral Dissertation Award in 2001, the Piquets Award in 2002, the Sloan Foundation Fellowship 2003, and the SIGCOMP Test of Time Award in 2011. Here's Jon Stoica's history before he became a professor at UC Berkeley. He was born and grew up in Romania in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, maybe a sliver of the 1960s. In 1989, he got his Master of Science degree in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at the Polytechnic University of Bucharest in Romania. We'll talk about his experiences there. In 1996, he immigrated to the US to do a PhD at Carnegie Mellon University. He finished his PhD in 2000 And then he joined Berkeley in 2000. 2006, he founded Conviva. 2013, he founded Databricks. 2019 was Anyscale. All of these have become major companies in Silicon Valley and the big data processing ecosystem. Welcome, Ion, to the Immigrant Computer Scientist podcast, and thank you for being willing to share your journey and your experiences and your story with us. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You grew up in Romania in the 1970s, 80s, 90s, maybe a bit of the 1960s. This was a time when Romania was a satellite republic of the Soviet Union until the revolution of 1989. Tell us about where you grew up and some of your early childhood memories.
I mostly grew up in Bucharest, the capital of Romania, and then I spent my vacation to my grandparents who are in a village like 80 kilometers from 50 miles from Bucharest. But all my entire education going from the primary school, middle school, high school, and then college were in Bucharest.
And what was your early interest in science and math? Was it immediately evident that you were interested in these things, or was it just an interest that grew over time?
I was interested in math from early on, and you are always, obviously, you are interested in what you are good at. So I really enjoy the math. But one thing maybe was different is that I was also pretty good drawing. So actually in middle school, I was also following in parallel 3 days per week, this kind of art school. Yeah. In Romania, it was every, the lectures, the classes, during the primary and the middle school. The primary school is 4 years, from 6 to 10, when you are age 6 to 10. And then middle school is from, obviously, 10 to 14. And so it's the next 4 years. And they are divided between, mornings and afternoons. Actually, you share the same school, both the middle and the primary school. The primary school kids go in the morning and they graduate, they finish up to noon, around noon. It's from 8 to noon. And then middle schools go from 1 to 6. And why I'm saying that is because then in middle school, that's why it gives you a lot more time and it makes it possible to even, follow to school in this case. Because you get, you need to go to to attend the school, the proper school, from 1 p.m. So you have the entire morning for yourself, so to speak. Right. So this is 3 days of the week I was going to this art school. And so this is up to 14 years. I was 14 years old. And then when you go to the high school, there are different profiles of the high schools. There are more profile of sciences, in particular math and physics. There are one which have more liberal profiles, art profiles, right? So actually then, because, I got pretty good results in this also art school, so I had to make a choice. That was one of the first choices I had to make. And I went obviously to one of this high school, which was more on math and physics. The other things, what maybe for people, at least in the United States, what is different is that what was the process? So a process of to get into a high school and the process to go into college. And this is a little bit different from maybe even from India or China. It's more similar with the French model. So to go to so the key here is that when you are going to get admitted to a high school or a college, you take an exam, okay, yeah. And that's practically the only thing that matters. So your GPA is not very important. When you get into the high school, I think you have two-day exam. Each day it's a 3-day exam, 3 hours exam. Math and Romanian, the equivalent, like you have English, right? Literature. Yeah. And so that's one. And then there is another one. It's held after 2 years in the high school, there is another exam, and even then, because even in the high school, it's science oriented, you have another a split to more science or less science, so you get another one.
So the first exam is around 8th grade, and then this bifurcation is around...
After 10 grades, between 10 grades and 11 grades. And the exam for the college is, again, you pick, that's in general is pretty stressful, because especially if at that time when I took the exam, it was during the communist regime. Right. And the reason is stressful because you take the exam, you have to decide one school. And it's again 3 days. It's 3 days in that case, not 2 days. 2 days is 2 exams for math. It's basically analysis and geometry, and then 1 day physics. And the problem is that if for somehow you do not make the cut, there is another chance in the fall. The exams are like here in like spring. But in fall, you only can go to universities which are not that great. They have still positions after the first session. Yeah. And if you don't get there, or if you don't want to get into one of these other colleges, then, the army is just mandatory for everyone. The difference is that if you get into university, into college, it's only 9 months, right? But if you don't, it was basically 1.5 years. So you actually waste 2 years. So that's it's pretty stressful. The point, though, is that why I'm telling you all of these things is because, the way the rules actually changes your behavior, right? It's like had an impact on the behavior. And the fact that, the GPA didn't count, activities didn't count. You don't write an essay, you don't write any of these things. There is an exam you take after you finish the high school. I think baccalaureate it's called. It's a French term, and basically to validate the fact that the basics, right? This is for everyone, right? The entire country. But that doesn't matter that much. But again, the only thing that matters when you go to college, really, it's about this 3 days exam. It's already like in the last 2 years of high school, people try to focus solely on the things to study for the kind of colleges they decided to go to.
And it's a way out of military service as well.
It's not a way out. It's shorter military service.
Shorter, I see.
It's shorter. It's 9 months.
So in your military service experience, what did you have to do?
It wasn't that bad. It was this, I was doing this radars, radiolocation and so forth. Nice. And of course you learn how to shoot and things like that. But it's, it's basically you have classes in the morning to learn, about different military equipment, to learn about, again, radars and things like that. And there are some exercises, instruction in the afternoon, things like that.
I see.
Still pretty much, it's you waste a lot of time, and you are colleague, you are already in people which goes typically the same colleges are in the same unit or something like that. So you actually started to meet your future colleagues. So it's not bad. Oh, I mentioned about this kind of decision I had to make between going to an art school or more of a science, a high school. The other decision, when I went to college, I was pretty good at physics. I went to all these Olympiads, also maths, but in particular physics. And at that level, if you're very good, you can get into the physics college without exam, right? So the top people, by the results in these Olympiads, you can get in there without exam. So, and physics, it was a pretty good career there, and it was well funded because one of the children of Ceausescu, the dictator, has interest in physics. And so that's why it was pretty well funded. But I decided to go more on the computers side. And so that was another kind of decision.
Given your interest in art, what made you go towards science and math in general? Was it the economics, or was it that you were more interested in the science and math?
Actually, the economics, not exactly. In socialism, once Romania, everyone was getting more or less the same salary. And basically, they were guaranteeing more or less the employment. Now, everything, the salary were low and so forth. And actually, some of the category of people who are getting higher salaries, there are, if you're a waiter or someone like that, because you get tips, right? Which you cannot get like as an engineer. So that's why actually taking tips, or if you are a doctor, some doctors took tips or things like that. And obviously, if you're someone with certain position in the party, clearly you have a much higher salary. So it wasn't really the salary. I think despite the fact I was pretty good, I think, on arts, and I got some prizes there. I think it's basically what attracted me more on the science is that the more objective evaluation of what you're doing, right? It turns out that, like in art, it's much more subjective, right? It's for better or worse, right? I wanted to say to be in an area in which the evaluation is more objective of what I'm doing.
This is the Immigrant Computer Scientist podcast interview with Jon Stoica, Professor of Computer Science at UC Berkeley. You mentioned Ceausescu. Of course, you grew up during the years that Ceausescu was the dictator and Romania was socialist, communist, was allied with the USSR. What effect did that have on your family and your upbringing? Especially your parents' jobs or life in general with your family?
Almost everyone I knew didn't believe in communism. Why was that? Because I think there are maybe communist countries in which maybe the communists, at least at the beginning, improve the quality of life of people. Maybe, people are dying of hunger and they address that problem at least. But Romania, before the Second World War, economically was pretty good. It was maybe mid of Europe, building even airplanes and trains and cars and things like that. And in 1918, after the First World War, it was Greater Romania. It was all the parties, all the areas where Romanians were living, now being part of Romania, including Transylvania, which was under Austro-Hungarian Empire until then.
Right.
And then Romania was also a constitutional monarchy from 1850s. Yeah. So basically, it was similar with, of course, there was corruption, but, modulo that, it was, you can think like England. There are two big parties and a smaller one in general.
Yeah.
That's so it was constitutional monarchy. In 1919, it was also this a reform to give land to peasants, to people. So it was, Romania was pretty good. But then after Yalta, in which the spheres of influence were divided, then it was, Romania was like 90% under Russia, and I think it was in case for Greece to be 90% under Europe, the Western allies. And there is another point. It's right now a country called Moldavia, where still even today, 70% of population speaks Romanian, now including the president. It's Romanian descendant. So that was a territory which was claimed by Russia. This, like in many other countries, there was a communist party in Romania.
Yeah.
And before the Second World War, this kind of territory was part of Romania. But the Communist Party, because like many other communist parties, was controlled by Moscow, was basically advocating that actually this territory, which was part of Romania, it actually should belong to Russia. So you can imagine that even people who are kind of on the left of the spectrum of the political party couldn't support that, right? Because it's basically anti-national, right? You have a party which claims somehow that actually this part, which is inhabited mostly of people speaking Romanian, is like, it should be part. And actually that's why Romania one of the reasons was in the Second World War was allies with Germany, because to liberate this territory which was taken by Russia at the beginning. But anyway. But the reason I'm saying that is that therefore the Communist Party was not very representative. And because it was not very representative, when Russia came and then it was a change of regime, communist regime, is that some people say it was kind of 800 people. So if you have hundreds of thousands in a party, even left party, you are going to have probably some bad, some good people, but you have only so few. It's going to be a very more brutal, right? Because you do not have a broad diversity in the party, right? So I think that's why, in some sense, if you put this together, that's why, in some sense, the communism was never really popular in Romania. And you ask about the impact of my parents and so forth. Yeah, my mother, but this is before I was born, obviously. She was at university. She was doing geology. And she was kicked out from the college because it was decided that her parents, they are not representative or kind of communist class.
I see.
Right?
Yeah.
My grandparent was basically a policeman in the village. So that's one. So after that, after 2 years, she was accepted back. But other than that, again, it's like you live into this, in some sense, it's a big lie, right? Because no one was fundamentally believing in communists, but it's a lot of repression. You grew knowing that, is what everyone was telling me, that you have a folder, right, which you'll take, everything is recorded, what you do. And I remember, and I'll end up with this because probably I think this was something which made a big impact on me. I was in high school, and in high school, the best, the people who are doing well, they have good grades. The party tries to bring them into their fold, right? And there are kind of different position or functions you have in the high school and so forth. So I'm not going to go into details, but I was proposed for one of these function or positions, and I said no, because I thought that it's just a waste of time. And I remember that it was a teacher. I was friend with her son. And when I went to play, it was 16 years old or 15 years old. And she told me that, look, you shouldn't have done that because that would go to your folder. But I know people and that will not happen or something like that. So then I thought, okay, that's kind of real.
Did that have any longer-term repercussions on you, or was it just a note in the folder?
I think, look, I mean, yeah, no, I cannot, no, I don't, he didn't have a repercussion. But at the end of the day, in 80s and so forth, in some sense also the Communist Party kind of started to lose a grip on the population, also because the economy was not doing great. At the end of the day, probably you can get away with many things as long as people are getting taken care of. But when economy goes and then there are difficulties in long lines to get gas, to get food and so forth, then people are not going to be happy no matter who is going to is leading the country.
Did your family have to live through food shortages during the 1980s?
Yeah, you are living, but I was, family of intellectual. I think that I think there are other people who are doing much worse than we are doing. And we are in Bucharest. Bucharest didn't suffer as much because of the capital as other parts of the country. We also have, again, on both sides, the grandparents who are in villages around Bucharest. So, they grew various things, both, vegetables and whatever, animals. So, yeah, it was fine. Yeah, but this is what it is about the communism. The communism in Romania was probably a bigger lie than almost in any other country. I was telling you that economically, before the Second World War, Romania was kind of, mid-Europe, mid-pack. Yeah. At the end of the communism was almost at the end.
Yeah. So the revolution of 1989, when it happened in Romania, how was, were you involved in that in some way, or did you try to stay away from it? Because you were in Bucharest, right, in the middle of it all.
I cannot claim that I was involved that much. Of course, I was just graduating from the college. I was just getting I was just starting my first job, which was, again, it was the Institute of Informatics. It's a National Institute of Informatics. So it was a pretty good job. I wasn't in any place in which they were shooting or something like that. Okay. I was on the streets, but not I didn't, because the shooting happened when started this kind of Ceausescu trying to make this kind of to have a big manifestation to support him. And that degenerated into, actually was not what he expected, and he flew. And there what happened, but I was not at that manifestation. That was basically people forced to come there.
And after the revolution of 1989, did you see the quality of life improve in the early 1990s? Or did it take a while?
Yeah, very quickly. I mean, it's very quickly. Like in other countries, but maybe in particular in Romania, is like after revolution, the biggest problem, it was corruption. Actually, politically, there are people who are, I mentioned to you this two parties, main parties. Actually, some of their leaders, young leaders, which are exiled, came back. So they immediately created this kind of old historical party. Even the former king came back. So it was changed very quickly. I was at this institute, even in Romania. I was starting even a PhD there. I was doing PhD there in Romania. You could do it in some sense on the side, so it wasn't serious. As a matter of fact, it was in neural networks. I was at that time. But yeah, the quality improved. It's corruption, a lot of corruption, because now you have all this kind of state-owned enterprises and things like that, and now you need to privatize them.
That's a good segue for me to ask you about your first encounters with tech. When was the first computer that you used in your life?
When I was probably in the 8th grade, my father bought then a Timex Sinclair. They were this kind of British computers. And I got that one. And I remember it was this kind of keys, which, you don't have really, QWERTY or something like that. You have keys in which you have mnemonics for like programs to write the program, like for or things like that. And so that was one. And I started to program and play, around.
What was your first programming language?
Basic, man. Basic.
Basic.
It came with basic. And then I got a Commodore, later. And then when I was in college, I started actually in my first year. I was writing programs on Fortran punch cards. So you go into this room and you punch the cards, and you have your stack of cards, and you go and give to people to run it, and come the next day to see the results.
Right.
But quickly after that, there was a lab. PCs were brought in. Very soon after, it was basically 82, 83, very quickly after, I think IBM PC was 81. And there are a bunch of very smart, very good faculty there who actually quickly, also had a Romanian clone, so to speak, PC clone.
I see. Yeah.
So I think, and there it was PC. I was doing mostly things on PC. Yeah, but the first one was a Sinclair Timex.
The other related question I want to ask is, so your schooling and then of course university education, but also on the streets with your friends and at home, what languages were you speaking, apart from Romanian?
So it's English.
Was that taught in school, English?
It's taught in school. Unfortunately, the other language, maybe it doesn't come as a surprise, was Russian.
Yeah.
You can imagine that. But it was almost, another language was French, but I would say English was pretty universally taught in schools, besides Russia.
So science and math were taught in English or Russian?
Everything was taught in Romanian, but you learn the English, the English.
I see.
And Russian, at foreign languages.
And then at home and on the streets with your friends, you spoke mostly Romanian.
We spoke mostly Romanian. Yeah.
So returning to your timeline, in the 1980s, you're doing your degrees in computer science, you're doing your master's. What was your first encounter with doing research?
I think the first project was on getting a handle on the PC, is to design an interactive package to design simple VLSI chips, something like that. So you could design, graphically, you save the files, and then you can, there are some packages which are simulating them.
Was that a project given by someone to you, or did you do that, like pick it up by yourself, or how did that come about?
There are two other friends which are spending most of the time in this kind of lab. There was a lab which particularly has the PCs, and we knew the faculty, and it wasn't accessible to everyone. It was under the key, but we knew the faculty, and you have to choose some projects, and we picked this project. We talked with the faculty, and he was, supportive. So it's a mix.
And then as you're finishing your master's, when you had to decide next steps, you said that you did a job, but then you also were doing a PhD part-time.
It's when you graduate again. Yeah, I was just graduating just before the communist fall.
Right, 1989, yes.
And the graduation, the way it happened, is like it's centralized, the assignment of the jobs, right, where you are going to go. So basically, they start from the top of the grades, right? And you can choose, right? So this is the only time in education in Romania where the GPA really mattered, right?
I see.
When you graduate from college, because it's a centralized assignment, so to speak. Because I was at the top, I could choose this Institute of Research in Informatics. So I went there. So it was pretty good. I think it's, it was, again, well-funded comparatively with other things in Romania. So I was lucky from that perspective. Then also started to happen, things started to happen quickly. Startups, well, they're not really startups. They are mostly, even today there are this one, like, it's like when you have a startup, you start here, and then you have development in some other countries. So the development are started people from companies from West starting to reach to Romania to hire software engineering to engineers to do for development. I was involved in some of that as well. It was a company from Italy, I remember.
I see. And that was your first encounter with a startup?
Yes, and that one, what I was doing, it was pretty cool. It was application. If you remember, it was this time when visual programming was pretty popular, like Visual Basic and so forth. And the things what you have to do is like you go to, you are going to build interactively the interface, and you generate then the skeleton of the program,
right,
where, then you need to fill the code when whatever event happens for each entry field, combo box, things like that. So that's kind of we are doing something which was working on, I remember, then has to generate code. I think it was C code, but for multiple platforms. It was Windows at that time, OS too, the IBM. I'm not sure you remember.
Yeah.
And IBM AIX, it's IBM Unix. It was called AIX.
You're listening to the interview with Jon Stoica, Professor of Computer Science at UC Berkeley. This is the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast. So that was in the 1990s when you were in this Informatics Research Institute. And then in 1996 or thereabouts, what made...
when I came in as a PhD, I came actually as a different university because it was Old Dominion University.
That's the story. Yeah.
In around 94, I believe it was.
94, okay.
Yeah, it was a faculty there. Stefano Lariu, he was a theoretician. He was Romanian. And, I applied to a few schools, and he called me.
Yeah.
And I didn't know. It was very early on, like during communism, no one went to United States for studies.
Right.
So it was just opening. Well, unless people who emigrated, right? But it was pretty close.
So what made you think of even applying?
Because people started to apply, other people. I stayed there for a few years, 3 years or 4 years. And, things are changing, but maybe not fast enough. So then I thought I should apply. And I went to Old Dominion, and it was great. I did there some work on, I did quite a few things. Also some high performance computing MPI, but most on the algorithmical side, algorithms for parallel programming. And then eventually my advisor there was Abdel Wahab. And Abdel Wahab was a pretty interesting guy. So he was graduating from, I think, Waterloo. He worked on complexity. He was early on in complexity, work on complexity theory. But now at that time, he was doing this video conferencing at that time.
Yeah.
So it was video conferencing for the classes, what we are doing now.
Yeah.
And so I work a little bit on that one. And I also want work with David Keith. It's another faculty who just joined Old Dominion University. He was doing high performance computing. There are a few people good on, very good on high performance computing because Old Dominion was close to NASA Langley. But then I take the call, and the call I did it, Abdel Wahab, who has also had a position at UNC adjunct, introduced me to Kevin Jeffey. Kevin Jeffey is a UNC, he's doing real-time system. So I started to work with Kevin on real-time system. And Kevin introduced me eventually to Hui Zhang, who was a new faculty just joining CMU.
Yeah.
And, after talking with these people and after visiting Hui, he was in first year, just joining CMU. I just, obviously I was impressed and I decided, to move.
Yeah.
So then
that's interesting. Yeah.
Moved to CMU in 96. I already before that I was starting to use, because I was telling you that I was doing more to this work on real-time systems, because Kevin Jeffrey was doing real-time system, and it was also some real-time system elements into this kind of video conferencing. I was doing quite a bit of scheduling, but more on the system side, operating system side.
Right.
And then when I went to CMU, I changed, focusing on networking, still doing some scheduling. Yeah. But really, at CMU, I started from scratch.
During your PhD years, you also were married and you had a kid. How did you juggle family and PhD life?
Oh, it's even harder than that. I had a kid in 97. So it's 1 year after I started my PhD at CMU. Ideally, because I didn't start the PhD right after the college and so forth, I felt that I have no time to lose. I felt the urgency. And I was actually planning to graduate in 3 years. But Hui told me that, it's stay for another year, you'll be better off. So he was right. He was born in 97 in July. But in 97, I also got an internship with Scott Schenker. And in Xerox Park, right? She was still there. And it was very hard because my wife came with me at Old Dominion. She also came as a PhD, and she remained there because she wanted to graduate.
I see.
So she was there. I was in Pittsburgh. She was pregnant. And actually, I was not in Pittsburgh. The summer I was in California, right? Palo Alto.
Right.
So that was very, very tough. I flew, 1 week, 2 weeks when my son was born. My mother-in-law came to help my wife. That was very tough time. And then in the fall, she moved to Pittsburgh with me. I think, a lot of credit goes to my wife. I mean, she got a job and she took also care of the kids, and my mother and my mother-in-law came for, 6 months each at the beginning and helped with it.
Yeah.
But, it wasn't easy, but, I had a lot of help because really I was working, day and night. I told you I was in this mode in which I felt that I always wasted so much time. I have no more time to waste.
Yeah. So in 2000, you're finishing your PhD, or maybe just the year before it, and you're considering the job market. You ended up coming to academia. Did you consider industry? Did you consider even going back to Romania? What were the options you were thinking of?
Going back to Romania, I did not at that time. And I always thought that I get into this mode, which basically say, maybe this sounds like big words, but the way I was brought and so forth, I remember, with my parents, in particular my father. I didn't say anything about my father, but my father, the reason I love math and everything is because of my father. It's like he was, obviously. I was educated in a very kind of open way. It's kind of more like humanistic, right? It's like, so one thing which I started to resent very early on was nationalism, because the communism was using the nationalism as a very potent tool to unify people, right? And part of the nationalism is not only the fact that, we are under attack, but also we are special. You are special, right? And have all these stories why Romanians are special, because you need to justify it. And because in some sense was brought by, it was coming from the Communist Party. And because the Communist Party, again, people did not believe, myself in the Communist Party, I developed this kind of reaction against the nationalist discourse. Okay? So I always felt that my duty is in some, hopefully I want to think in a broader terms of, how can I help the society at large, not only Romanian society. Of course, I'm going back, and I've gone back almost every year. I'm meeting with, my former faculties, former colleagues. I can help wherever I can. But I always see that in a broader context. The primary duty, in some sense, if you have a duty, it's towards society in general. The borders are not and shouldn't be as meaningful. And if anything, as probably you've seen maybe, but in at least in my case, many people like which I immigrate in the United States, it's enforced by the fact that, people are not that different, are the same. Fundamentally are the same, are people, right? And I remember that my father brought this to me, that just to give a sense. So he was, geophysics. He was engineering, doing geophysics. And because Romania has this kind of relationship with other countries, and including from Africa, and other countries have oil or something like that. So my father was kind of, traveling from time to time, because hiring specialists from Romania, I assume, was cheaper than, from Western countries. And the education in Romania was very good, obvious. And this was always telling me that, it's like even countries like you think are so different. No, people are fundamentally the same.
Have you seen the tech industry in Romania grow in the last 20 years or so since you started at Berkeley?
Yeah, it grew. I think obviously the education was very good, and especially the education was very good in elementary school and high school. The college was not that great. You didn't have a lot of options and so forth, and becomes to be too politicized. But middle and the high school was very good. Right now, I think, it remains still good, and comparatively, and there are many companies, like for instance UPass, the company UPass, which went IPO last year. I don't know, it's $30 billion valuation. They are this robotic automation processes. I think it's called RIP. It was founded in Romania. So, there are a few companies. There is a security company, pretty successful startup. So you can see the signs. And there are certain progress. Of course, there is still corruption and everything. But Romania is part of European Union, is part of NATO, and all of this stuff.
So returning to your timeline, so you have been involved with founding several startups, which is very hard to do given all the other things we have to do as faculty. You were involved with Conviva in 2006, and Databricks 2013, and more recently Anyscale. How do you manage the time? That's one thing I want to ask. But also, what is it that is driving you to entrepreneurialize the research results that you have?
It's an excellent question. I thought quite a bit. I remember when I came to Berkeley, Dave Patterson was talking a lot about the impact. I realized quite early that I do want to have impact. And the way I was trying to think about how to have an impact, it is, there is a definition of impact. Dave Patterson has a good one. But the way I'm thinking about the impact is about you improve the professional lives in general, because, I'm not, you improve the professional life of some category of people. That's it. And for me, whatever I'm doing, it's different modalities to have impact. So that's kind of where I am coming from. of course, and peer-to-peer, Conviva only started was peer-to-peer, right? I was doing peer-to-peer, we are told that the internet will fall on its knee when the video will go over the internet, will crash everything. So, I thought it's an interesting problem. This is how I started Conviva, with my former advisor, with my advisor, Hui. It's actually, from there, it's kind of started to snowball, because at Conviva, I've seen firsthand some problems which are hard. It was doing real-time analytics, ad hoc analytics on a large, it was, because at the end of the day, the product which was most successful from the one Conviva built, it was this kind of for operators to see in real time what happens with their video distribution, especially for live events, and to take, then to diagnose and to take action, right? And this requires a bunch of real-time analytics, streaming, and analytics, and then ad hoc you need in order to diagnose, to slice and dice. Yeah. And these are the problems actually try to solve. Especially I remember the ad hoc analytics. It was soon initially we do some SQL data, MySQL, we use MySQL. Then, obviously, this was very early at the company. We have a few customers. Then the traffic increased and one machine was not enough. So we are doing, we are going to do it. We shared it. And I remember so clearly that we shared it. We ordered the biggest, largest servers. At that time, it was on the cloud. So we have our own data centers. Yeah. 6, 7 servers. A lot of memory. We have to move, and you need to have this we need to move the InnoDB, like for MySQL, so that the data is in memory, so you can do these ad hoc queries. When something happens, you really need to see what happens. And by the time the servers came, we are already too large for those servers. We ended up, we have no choice but scrap the feature because we couldn't support. So this kind of things, the problems start to trigger, and obviously there are also, Hadoop was there, started to happen. At least that was triggered my interest in big data. And actually Spark, when we built Spark, and also Mesos. Also, again, there are many other reasons we did it, but this is, I'm telling you my motivation. The other thing was having is at Conviva, we have 2 stacks. The real-time stack, which basically get always, you always get, constantly you get, logs from the users and you stream them and to see what happens. And ad hoc, you need to summarize, to compute summarizations, right? To also to do you need to compute. So you have streaming and batch. Batch was computing summaries. I told you that we are having our own data centers. So you have these 2 servers, these two different clusters. Now, a lot of traffic was live. You have World Cup, Olympics. Mm-hmm. So now you have to provision and to buy the servers for the peak, right? Yeah. So it was pretty inefficient, it cost ineffective. And we always were thinking that if I somehow can run them on the same cluster, when there is a live event, I can delay computing the summaries, right? So I can just do the real time. And later, after the event happens, I'm going to catch up, right? But I couldn't do that. So this is the Mesos, right? It's in some sense. And then for Spark, there are 2 use cases. One was internal machine learning from the lab. The other one was this I mentioned to you, doing more real-time analytics, which I was. And then with Spark, then with Databricks, with Spark, we've done this, and with Spark, got traction and so forth. And the first thing we talked with some people, I think it was Horton at that time, and we asked them if they want to take over the project, because it was clear at that point that if we want for Spark to succeed in some way as an open source, there has to be a company behind it. Right? Because people are starting to say, well, I'm going to, what happens when Mateo or whoever graduates, right?
Yeah.
So we asked them, and, they were not willing because they were also developing another system at that time called TES, a successor for the MapReduce. Right. And then, we started Databricks. But it's again, this is what I'm trying to say. At the end of the day, to answer your question, it's what excites like everyone, right? You are excited when you are doing something which is appreciated. And if you do something which makes the jobs of some people better, it's a great satisfaction. And that's why you see, like, that's what I'm telling everyone. Like, for instance, why I started Anyscale. It's clear that I'm not starting Anyscale for money. It's like, I don't, like Databricks was doing quite well. Or for fame. If I care about fame, I care only about academic fame. So I write more papers, right? It's like, that's a more better. Or I don't start it because I don't have what to do, right? I have a lot of things to do. I just started because I think that, and I'm helping actually with Anyscale, because I think, it's solving an important problem, and I can help with that.
This is the Immigrant Computer Scientist podcast interview with Jon Stoica, Professor of Computer Science at UC Berkeley. It was also interesting to notice while you were talking that problems that you observed, or rather failures you observed in a previous startup, motivated some of the things you were doing in your next startup. That was kind of interesting to observe. I want to take a step back from there and ask in general about failures and rejections. We as scientists are always used to getting our ideas turned down at least once, papers getting rejected, a proposal getting rejected. Of course, in the startup world, this exists. Do you have a philosophy for handling failures and rejections?
So obviously you have many failures and rejection. And always one thing you need to keep in mind that in many cases is that it has to deal also with the expectations, right? Your own expectation, right? It's a difference between reality and expectations, right? So if you have a very low expectations, you are going to have fewer rejections, right? So I think that there are two things here. So the first thing is about I'm trying to get in the mode when something like this happen. So what we are good at, Indy. Yeah. And I draw the conclusion that what we are good at, in our profession, we are good at solving problems. It's what we are good at, right? That's why, we got high scores at exams and things like that. And these are problems to solve, right? Yeah. And when you are down, when you have a failure, if you start to look at that as a problem to solve, I found that to be kind of refreshing, because now you put you in an active mode, right? Yeah. How to solve that problem. Okay, it's down, it's a problem. So let's, it just put you like, maybe everyone felt that, man, is this problem, I didn't solve it for 1-2 days, and you feel it, take it personally, I'm going to solve it and so forth, right? Of course, the failures are personal in the first place, but if you put in the mode, I think the key is to get out of the mode in which, you are depressed and maybe thinking, why did this happen to me, or things like that, right? It's a little bit, just think about, it's a problem to solve, right? And of course, it's emotional. We are emotional, animals, right? And there is no question that it affects you, right? Even if you don't want. But after a few hours or whatever, I noticed that if you start thinking about the problem, then you are going to feel a little bit energized. The second thing, which I think it's another thing, because I had this problem, maybe other people have, is like early on, maybe in career and so forth, the fear of being wrong, right? Is stressful, right? So the things I started to not actually to at a point to be very comfortable, far more comfortable with it, is that, this, again, if you think about what does it mean if you are wrong? Yeah. If you are wrong, this means that actually you learn something, right? So fundamentally, you are going to be a better person. Because you are going to know more. You are going to learn more. If you're right all the time, you don't learn much, right? So again, if you just change that viewpoint, I found always easier to deal with with being wrong. And because, sometimes I have to say, it was very hard for me to accept. And I was just arguing for the sake of the argument, or for didn't want to recognize I was wrong, right?
That's a beautiful philosophy, actually. My last question is a little bit hypothetical. So if instead of growing up in Romania in a parallel world, you had grown up, say, in the US from when you were a child, all else being equal, you are the same person, family support is there, everything else is there. Do you think your life and career choices may have been different?
Professionally, no. I don't think professionally I would have been different, especially since probably, the emphasis on arts is probably even less here than United States, in Romania. Yeah. And in literature or things like that, I was not that good to start with. So that was not my strength. But I think that growing up in Romania, in a small country, I grew in a much more open society, despite the fact that it was communist, towards the world. And if I'm just thinking about, one good thing about communism, you always need to, you can emphasize on the good parts, because there was no way, there are very few ways to have fun, entertainment. Mm-hmm. By the way, in the last year, there were like 2 or 3 hours of TV per day. And these are just, news, right? News about the Communist Party. Yeah. So I read a lot, right? And literature, and so I read, Russians, all the, French literature, German literature. So all of these things I was, my parents always bought all these books. And I think that shapes you, right? And I think that if I grew here, for sure I would have been exposed much less to this kind of more the world as a whole. And the other thing is that, look, it was tough during communism. And, sometimes maybe this makes you to want more some things, to appreciate some things more, not take them for granted. So that's probably also has an impact, right? Makes you to have more grit, provides you more, also makes you more resilient, right? When you grow in a country, you saw a revolution, you saw a shortage of food, of gas, and things like that. Pretty much the basics. You grow in a country in which, to get a car, it takes years, right? And it's a big event, right? And what car, so when you grow in that environment, it's like you talk about failures and hardships, you can put them in perspective. So it has to do something like that. Or even here is another thing, like you go and probably this is in India as well. It's when you go at school, you are 6-year-old. It's brutal, right? You have the grades everything is public, right? The grades are public. You are going to be asked in front of the house of the class to answer questions. If you don't know, you are shamed and so forth. And it shapes you, right? By the way, as a matter of fact, I think that kids are extremely resilient, because despite all of this, kids, everyone is still very happy, right? Yeah. But still, I don't know how, there are these things, intangibles, environment and context, which you don't control, which shape you.
Yeah, that's very beautifully put. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about which we didn't cover?
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that, in the life of everyone, there are a few people, teachers, who shapes you. I think this is incredibly important. Like I mentioned, of course, it's your family, my father in particular, who also always, no matter what I was doing, he trusted me and he also encouraged me. There are a few people at, if I remember correct, it's like during the elementary school, the one person I think I remember very clearly, it was a history teacher. And this was in middle school. And the reason I remember I love this teacher, it was before then, geography, history was about memorizing. And this history teacher was about trying to, asking us, which was pretty hard at the beginning, trying to make us think about why things happened. And I love that. Right? And for many people, it was a hard adjustment. Maybe I adjusted a little bit easier but maybe because of that. But I really like this teacher, and I think it was formative for me. It is funny because he was not a math or a teacher. Yeah. And then, in high school, I did have the math and teacher who formed, it's really, and physics teachers.
Yeah.
Who, you look at them as role models. You look at, that's when something changes you, right? Because you start to look at the role models. And if you look at the role models, you want to do some of the things they are doing.
Right.
At college, it was this faculty, Irina Atanasiou, who was enormously influential on whatever I've done, and not only on me, but a few other people, because she was always trying to bring us books. The books were expensive. There was borrow books and so forth. And there are another two faculties, Nicolae Sepuș and Trandafir Moisa is their name, which is who actually they were instrumental. I mentioned to you about this kind of PC clone, Romanian PC clone. Yeah. They did it. I think that when I'm going back, there are just a few people who really shapes you in a disproportionate way. And of course, Hui at Carnegie Mellon, and I remember it's probably the best advice I got. He told me that, just focus on doing great work, everything else will follow. I'm sure that I missed a few of them. I think you always realize how important are some people in shaping what you are and beyond the family. That's why, in some sense, you want to give back, right? If you can, to your students and people you are working with.
That's a beautiful way to end our podcast. Thank you, Ion, for coming on the podcast and for being so open and willing to share your journey and experiences with us. In probably the only word I know in Romanian, mulțumesc. Thank you.
Cu plăcere. Welcome.
Thank you. This was episode 32 of the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast. You have heard the immigration story of Ion Stoica, professor of computer science at UC Berkeley and founder of Databricks, Anyscale, and Conviva. If you liked this episode, you may also enjoy the lead episode of this Romania segment of our podcast, that's episode 31, featuring two prominent computer scientists originally from Romania and who have been in the US since the 1990s. Coming up next week in episode 33 is Rada Mihalcea, professor of computer science and engineering at the University of Michigan and also director of the AI Michigan Lab. Rada describes in that episode growing up poor in communist Romania of the 1970s and 1980s and life after the revolution in 1989, of how her family members were blacklisted by the government, of the administrative mistake that led to Rada even applying to grad schools in the US, of her doing a second PhD, of handling imposter syndrome, and of her continuing efforts for her homeland, Romania. All of that is next week. Stay tuned. As usual, you can find all episodes and detailed episode guides on our website, csimmigrant.org. Again, that's csimmigrant.org. And you can find us and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and basically wherever you get your podcasts. All the music used in episodes of the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast is royalty-free. All voice recordings were performed with and are reproduced with full consent of narrators and participants. You can find music credits on our website. Join the online discussion about this podcast on all major social media, including Twitter and Facebook, with the handle CSImmigrant and hashtag CSImmigrant. And of course, the episode guide is available at our website, csimmigrant.org. This is the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast.